You there, Trish?
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back on the record. Docket number 42310. Mr. Thomas, call your panel. Swear your panel in, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the panel of Jamie Barber, Richard Spellman, John Kaduk, and John Athis to the stand on behalf of the Public Interest Advocacy staff. And if you can please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
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 Thank you. And Ms. Barber, can I start with you? Can you please state your name and by whom you are employed for the record?
Jamie Barber, the Georgia Public Service Commission.
And Mr. Spellman, can you please state your full name and by whom you're employed for the record?
Richard Spellman, and I'm employed by GDS Associates.
And Mr. Kaduk, same question.
John Kaduk with the Georgia Public Service Commission.
And Mr. Athis, same question.
John Athis with Daymark Energy Advisors.
And on April 25th of this year, did you pre-file or cause to be pre-filed 94 pages of public disclosure and trade secret testimony in question and answer format?
We did.
And did you also pre-file on that same date 17 exhibits that were marked staff BSKA 1 through BSKA 17?
Yes, we did.
Do you have any changes or corrections that you need to make to either your pre-filed public disclosure testimony, trade secret testimony, or any of the exhibits at this time?
No, we don't.
And if I were to ask you the same questions here under oath, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask at this time that the panel's public disclosure pre-filed testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that exhibits marked as staff exhibits 16 through 30 would be marked as staff exhibits 16 through 32.
So marked.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to ask that the trade secret testimony be marked as staff exhibit 33.
So marked.
Ms. Barber, do you have a summary that you can offer at this time?
I do. In our testimony, we addressed Georgia Power Company's proposed demand-side plan and associated demand-side issues, the company's request for certain approvals regarding the use of its updated renewable cost benefit framework, the proposed 950 megawatt customer renewable supply procurement program, the proposed 50 megawatt distributed generation request for proposals, and the company's simple solar tariff revision, all of which were contained in the company's 2019 integrated resource filing. Staff has reviewed the company's proposed DSM plan and recommends approval as modified by staff's recommendation contained in this and staff's testimony in docket number 42311. Specifically, we recommend approval of staff's revised DSM budgets, which were provided in staff exhibit BSKA-8. Staff recommends that the Commission's current DSM policy be clarified further to recognize DSM resources as a high priority resource for the IRP development process going forward, and that the Commission require that the company include an additional scenario in its 2022 IRP development and resource optimization process where DSM is allowed to compete on a level playing field with traditional supply side options. When the DSM program impact and process evaluation is completed in 2021, staff recommends that all the KWH and KWS savings from the company's certified DSM programs in 2022 be adjusted to actual evaluated savings rather than waiting until 2023. The Demand Side Management Working Group is an important component of the DSM planning process, and staff recommends that this group continue in its present form. Regarding the additional sum for the company's DSM program, staff recommends that the Commission retain the current methodology and the company collects an additional sum equal to 8.5% of the actual net benefit based on the net energy savings from the program administrator test. Once the additional sum exceeds the company's annual program cost, the percentage for the additional sum shall be reduced to 4%. Staff further recommends that the additional sum be based on net, not gross energy savings, and that all references to the use of non-participant spillover by the company in its IRP and DSM certification documents be removed. Now I will turn it over to Mr. Kadick, who will address the renewable issues.
I will address the company's request to update the framework for the evaluation of costs and benefits for renewable resources. The company is both seeking approval of the RCB framework methodologies and its planned use of the RCB framework for future renewable resource evaluations. If approved, the RCB framework will continue to use in evaluations of variable energy resources. While the company provided RCB framework values for renewables, their analyses are illustrative and provide a general expectation regarding the costs and benefits of such resources. The actual RCB framework values that will be utilized for project evaluation will be calculated later using the methodologies presented in the 2019 IRP, and the values will vary from the illustrative values presented due to updates to assumptions. Pursuant to the August 2nd, 2016 IRP order adopted stipulations, staff worked with the company throughout the fall of 2016 to evaluate and refine the RCB framework components. Staff, with assistance from Daymark Energy Advisors, engaged in multiple discussions and technical conferences to review the methodology and underlying data and assumptions behind each component. The result of this process was the December 2nd, 2016 joint recommendation, which was approved by this commission on December 22nd, 2016. In 2017, the company worked with staff and Daymark to finalize the revisions to the RCB framework document to incorporate the changes agreed to in the joint recommendation. At this time, the company recalculated the values of RCB framework components using the revised inputs and substantial methodological changes, such as the incorporation of winter reliability issues of solar resources due to changes in the capacity worth factor table. On June 7, 2017, the Commission approved the company's request to apply the RCB framework to behind-the-meter solar, which occurred after many discussions with staff and other parties. These revisions also included changes to the renewable and non-renewable tariff. In late 2017 and 2018, staff and Daymark continued discussions with the company to explore the drivers of the changes in the capacity worth factor table and the resulting devaluation of the solar capacity value. During these discussions, the company provided more explanation regarding the drivers of winter reliability concerns that were covered in the reserve margin study filed in this docket. The focus of staff's review was the RCB framework structure and components, the methodologies used to calculate each component, and the application of the RCB framework for future renewable project evaluations. Staff recommends approving Georgia Power's updated RCB framework with modifications as discussed in our testimony. Staff recommends that the company review the issues that staff has identified concerning the generation remix and support capacity components, revise the illustrative RCB framework analyses using staff's recommended methodology, and provide new versions of all work papers within 60 days from the final order in this docket. Staff recommends that solar plus storage projects should be considered their own technology in regard to the RCB framework analysis. The company and staff should develop an agreed-upon evaluation of renewable energy plus storage systems collaboratively within the RCB framework, similar to the methodology used by the company in its recent ready utility scale RFPs. Regarding Georgia Power's proposed customer renewable supply procurement program specifics and guidelines, staff recommends that staff and the company should work together to develop such program guidelines prior to bringing the program to the Commission for approval. The ultimate procurement amount for the CRSP program and distributed generation RFP is a Commission policy decision, but staff would support a larger renewable procurement for both. If the total renewable procurement approved in this proceeding is larger than the 950 megawatts, staff recommends that any portion of the procurement that would be used to serve customers outside of CRSP should allow all renewable resources to compete, which would include wind, solar, hydro, and biomass. Staff recommends that additional sum remain at its current level, 8.5% of savings for the CRSP projects and projects selected for the DG RFP. Staff further recommends that the company recover a de minimis additional sum on any projects for any of its affiliates that may be selected as winners of the CRSP RFP. The company's filing did not include a customer-sited program. However, staff recommends the continuation of a customer-sited program for the 2019 IRP, similar to the Ready CSDG program. Finally, staff recommends deferring the decision regarding the revision in simple solar tariff to the company's upcoming rate case. Commissioners, this concludes our subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, the panel is available for questions from commissioners and cross-examination.
Thank you. Commercial group?
No question.
Concerned Ratepayers of Georgia?
No question.
Emory University?
No question.
Georgia Association of Manufacturers?
I was just starting.
Georgia Distributive Generation?
Just have a couple quick questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to ask you questions. In your testimony, you state that participation in the previous renewable RFPs has been robust. Isn't it true that all or nearly all of the megawatts in the previous programs have been allocated?
Yes, that's correct.
And both the PSC staff and the Georgia Power staff reviewing those programs have been able to implement the commission's orders.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, and both the PSC staff and the Georgia Power staff that have been able to implement the commission's orders on those programs.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Georgia Industrial Group? Georgia Interfaith Power and Light?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, panel.
Good afternoon.
I just have a few DSM-related questions. And this is specifically in relation to the DSM working group. Now, as facilitator of that process, staff is aware that one of the early steps is that the company puts out its latest assessment of achievable efficiency potential, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in the 2018 study, as with other past assessments, that report found considerable available savings potential, particularly in the commercial and industrial sectors.
Yes, that's correct.
And roughly 2 years later in the stakeholder process, the company presents its DSM proposal, which is usually fairly similar to what it ends up filing along with the IRP, right?
Yes.
Now, the current proposal, like ones in past IRPs, would capture only a fraction of the total achievable savings identified in that assessment, right?
That's correct.
In fact, it would save less than about 0.5% of annual sales.
Yes.
And this time, it would achieve lower annual kilowatt hour savings than the DSM proposal approved in 2016, right?
Well, it's definitely less than actuals. So I know in our testimony we put that it's lower than their actuals, 0.48%, I believe. But do you know?
Well, I know in our testimony, we said that what they're proposing for megawatt hour savings is lower than actuals achieved in 2018.
Even though they're proposing to spend slightly more this time?
Correct.
And are you aware that other utilities in the Southeast, for example, Duke Carolinas, annually save more than twice what the company proposes to save, in excess of 1%?
We are aware of that data. In fact, we have a report that we've looked at. Let's see, I think it was from SACE. So anyway, we are aware of those numbers.
So would you agree as a general matter that while the DSM working group generally begins with a finding of abundant savings potential, it usually ends with a plan that is suboptimal in terms of going after those available savings?
I would say that during the working group sessions, a lot of the members expressed various views on levels that should be achieved and the programs that should be implemented. And but the short answer is that the portfolio that is approved is cost effective, and with in every IRP that I've been involved in since 1995, when I first sat in on an IRP hearing, the portfolios that are approved always pass the TRC test and have significant net present value savings for ratepayers. And they may not be the portfolio that every single member would want to have, but it's a collaborative process. But in the end, it's the company's plan, and the company puts forth their plan.
Okay, I understand. But they're capturing around a little more than a third of the savings identified in that assessment, correct?
Correct. And then, in the IRPs that are filed, there are more than one scenario that's proposed. There's a base case or a proposed case. There's an aggressive case and an advocacy case. And so in the end, it's really a policy decision for the commission to decide, which level to pursue.
Right. And as regards the plan that the company puts forward, would you agree with me that the limiting factor is budget, the amount the company says it's willing to devote to its DSM proposal?
That's a part of it. I'd say it's more complex than that, because there also is the company has brought up for years the consideration of rate impacts. So I think there are a lot of things that go into that decision, and certainly budget is one of them.
Okay, but would you agree with me that the DSM stakeholders have no control over the budget and that the process provides for no input over the company's budget?
Jamie, I think I'll let you answer that one.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And would you agree that exactly how the budget is determined is, at least from the perspective of stakeholders, somewhat of a black box?
Well, yes, Georgia Power has told the DSM working group that it is set by their management.
Who don't participate in the meetings?
That's correct.
Now, you've noted the company does not allow DSM to compete on an equivalent basis with supply-side resources. So I guess one thing we know about the budget setting process is that the chosen budget does not reflect an effort to determine the optimal level of energy efficiency that should be included in its plan.
That's correct.
And for that reason, in your view, the company's DSM proposal fails to treat energy efficiency as a priority resource?
That's part of it. I think, yes, the commission adopted Standard 16 of the Energy Independence and Security Act back in the 2010 IRP, and that standard actually says would establish cost-effective energy efficiency as a priority resource, so the commission adopted that. But the other part of it that the commission adopted was that it would integrate energy efficiency resources into utilities, state, and regional plans. And our testimony points out that the way the modeling process is done, that energy efficiency programs aren't allowed to compete on a head-to-head basis with supply side.
Right. And one of your recommendations is that in the next iteration of the stakeholder group that they should produce a scenario that does just that.
Correct.
Okay. Do you know if the company supports that recommendation?
We don't know.
Would you agree that even if the company agrees or if they're directed by the commission to perform this additional scenario, that alone wouldn't address the budget setting issue we just talked about, would it?
It certainly would help, because if you allow energy efficiency to compete head-to-head, the modeling process will determine the optimal amount of energy efficiency, and then for that scenario, you'd have to have a budget. So that would be one of the 4 scenarios. There'd be a proposed case, an aggressive case, an advocacy case, and a integrated resource planning case. So you would have the budget information available to know what budget would be required if you use that approach.
Right. And to be clear, I agree, we agree it would be helpful, but couldn't the company still just come forward with its preferred budget to accompany its preferred plan? That's not based on that scenario?
Yes.
And to avoid that happening, couldn't the commission direct the company to achieve a savings performance target, such as a gradual ramp up to 1% annual savings?
I mean, yeah, that is a policy decision the commission could choose.
Does staff agree that efficiency investments can avoid the need for more expensive supply side options?
Yes, we do.
And that's what we mean when we say efficiency is a resource, right?
Yes.
And is that what staff means when you say that efficiency should be recognized and treated as a high priority resource? Or is that part of what you mean?
That's correct.
Would you agree that efficiency investments designed to capture savings of at least 1% of prior year sales, if made over the next several years, could avoid or significantly lessen the company's projected next capacity need?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, just a few questions about the long-term rate impacts of the advocate's case, of the proposed case. Staff and the company reached agreement on a methodology for calculating long-term percentage rate impacts, right?
Correct.
And that was a directive coming out of the 2016 IRP.
Correct.
Would you agree that it took some time for the staff and the company to reach this agreement?
And, well, let me clarify my prior answer. I think it actually started probably in the 2013 IRP. So we've been working on this for quite some time, and we finally reached agreement after the 2016 IRP order.
So roughly when Game of Thrones began.
It's been quite a process.
Okay, and was it more difficult than you expected?
You mean coming up with a process that we all agreed to? Yes.
Now, the results calculated for this IRP show the company's proposed DSM programs would have a very small long-term percentage rate impact of less than 1.5% per year, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that's an important point, that, you know, the rate impacts over the long term for the company's proposed case are fairly small when compared to the rate impacts of other resources.
And to give some added context here, are you aware that the new Vogtle units are projected to have a rate impact of in excess of 10%,
Yes.
with roughly half of that currently in rates?
I don't know about how much is currently in rates, Steve. No.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Thank you.
Hoping for some more Game of Thrones references, yeah.
Large-scale solar.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, panel. Good afternoon, Brad Carver, Hall B. Smith, on behalf of the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association. Hope you all are doing well. Just a couple questions. Generally speaking, among classes of solar, isn't it true that utility scale solar, because of economies of scale, provides the best value to ratepayers, even taking into account wheeling of power and line losses?
Utility scale provides a higher net benefit. Is that what
Yes.
you're asking?
Yes.
Yes.
On page 66 of your testimony, starting at line 15, is a question about the extrapolation method which says the extrapolation method devalues utility scale solar when compared to DG solar. Could the panel explain that?
Sure. Yeah, this is, the methodology was going forward with, doing it both ways for utility scale and DG solar. And at the point where they needed to extrapolate because they were moving away from the model runs, the company took an escalation period from history for a compound average growth rate, and the choppiness of the results from the model actually created a much different escalation rate for extrapolation between the two different types of solar. And because of that, it undervalued the utility scale solar and caused one of the components of the RCP to look a little bit a little bit off compared when you compared utility scale to a little counterintuitive when you compare utility scale to DG solar.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Just one final question. If you go to page 90 of your testimony, starting at line 7, this is your overall recommendation as far as the CRISP program. Your recommendation is that the staff's overall recommendation is that the utility procure more than what is proposed, but is not giving a number as part of your testimony. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think our testimony is that we would expect it to be at least equivalent with the READY program. But yes, we do not give a number. We said it's a policy decision.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Georgia Solar Energy Industries. Okay. Cause your watch. Resource Management? Sierra Club? Oh, okay.
Afternoon, panel.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Catherine?
In the first round of hearings with Georgia Power witnesses, staff's attorney established the overhead for a KWH saved under the residential DSM program was 8 cents and 6 cents overhead for saved KWHs on the commercial program. Do you recall that?
I recall the discussion.
Well, do you agree with it?
That was our, yes, that was our calculations of the company's proposed plan. That does not consider our recommendations.
Your recommendation would reduce the overhead cost to something less?
Yes.
How much less?
Well, let me ask you this. You know, I didn't develop the 8 cents, so I remember hearing the discussion. But if you could clarify for me, was that per first year kilowatt hour saved or per lifetime kilowatt hour saved?
Well, the staff attorney was Preston Thomas on that. And I take it that was the KWH save due to the measures taken.
Okay, I'll assume it's per first year kilowatt hour saved.
I didn't think it was, but nonetheless, that's a lot, pretty high overhead to save power.
Well, actually, I did a study of that.
Really?
And I looked at the costs of all what would you call it? The incentive cost per first year kilowatt hour saved and the non-incentive cost per first year kilowatt hour saved for all the utilities in the United States that report kilowatt hour savings. And I actually have the results. Overall, Georgia Power, I can actually tell you where they rank. So give me just a second, and I'll pull that up. I just happen to have that analysis. So I did the analysis, and I looked at the residential sector versus the non-residential sector. And the way it came out was for the residential sector, out of all the utilities that reported savings, there were 483. Georgia Power ranked 282 out of 483 on their non-incentive costs per kilowatt hour saved. So they were in the third quartile. On the non-residential sector, there were 425 utilities reporting, and Georgia Power ranked 178, so they were in the second quartile. So what I would say is they're like squarely in the middle. There's always room for improvement. You know, they could do better, but they're certainly not in the fourth quartile. So I would say that they're in the ballpark of a reasonable range of non-incentive costs per first year kilowatt hour saved.
Well, we couldn't say that Georgia Power's programs are cheaper than generating power if the overhead alone is 8 cents.
Well, actually, you can.
Oh,
In fact,
really?
they've provided that number in their filing for the proposed case. The levelized cost per kilowatt hour saved is 2 cents.
That's for the measures itself, the incentive cost? Or is that
I believe that's, well, let me look it up.
Okay.
It's on I think it's the last page. Here. Okay, so I am looking, this came from their filing, Technical Appendix 2, Appendix E, the page that shows the summary of DSM program economics. And it says the cost of saved energy for their programs is 2 cents per kilowatt hour saved.
Is that the
So that's-
measures-
so
the
that's-
measures- That's the measures and the overhead?
That's my understanding because this table includes all of their costs, and I believe that's a TRC cost, so it includes participant costs as well.
Just before we get to the 4 cents that Georgia Power wants to add on it now.
Well, I believe that's correct, that this
Yes.
doesn't, that this does not include the shareholder incentive. So what it shows is that it appears that energy efficiency is the least expensive resource out of all the resources proposed in the IRP filing.
In determining these savings, how are these verified?
The company does an evaluation. Well, first of all, the company has program implementers, and the company has filed what do they call implementation manuals, where they lay out how they verify the installations, and they have measurement and verification built into the implementation. So they have people, the program implementers, check to make sure that the measures got installed. And then the company is also required to do evaluations of the programs, and they put out a contract, an RFP, hire independent evaluator to evaluate the programs, and the programs are evaluating according to the international performance measurement and verification protocols and the protocols of the Uniform Methods Project. So it's a rigorous evaluation. The commission staff reviews the evaluation plans and the survey instruments and the sampling plans. The evaluation contractor does their work, provides a report. The commission staff reviews all the reports and the results and the confidence intervals on the results. So it's a very rigorous and robust evaluation that they have in place.
On the 4-cent adder, that's recovered in the DSM surcharge, is it not?
No, in fact, the 4-cent for the shareholder incentive hasn't been approved. That was the company's proposal.
If it was.
But it would, yes, that's
Yes.
correct, if it was approved.
Right. Now, that adder is profit, and the company gets to collect the income tax on the profit, and that's not in the surcharge, is it?
Well, I think there were like 3 questions there.
Oh.
So it was, if the first question was, is it profit? So I would, it's an additional.
It's a shareholder incentive, so,
Are you saying it's not profit?
I'm saying it is
There
profit.
you go. Now, Georgia Power, when they collect $1 of profit, they've got to collect 21% federal income tax and 6% state income tax. So any profit is going to have this tax gross up. This tax gross up goes into base rates instead of the DSM surcharges, does it not?
No, this is recovered through the tariffs.
The tariff recovers the income tax collections?
Well, it recovers the DSM additional sum.
Yeah, I know that. I'm talking about the tax consequences of the additional sum.
I'm not really sure.
Well, it would have to show, then you don't think they're going to waive it, do you?
We're not tax accountants. We're demand-side management planners and evaluators and implementers. It sounds like that's a better question for a tax accountant.
No, well, actually, I'm thinking Jamie Barber's been in
Oh,
the
but you had
rate department. So.
other parts of your questions. So
Oh.
if you're going back to your 3-part question, what were the other 2 parts?
Well, I don't think Georgia Power is going to not collect the taxes on the
Is that a
4 cent.
statement or a question, Mr. Clark?
Pardon?
Is that
Is
a
that-
statement or a question?
Well, I'm just trying to find out where it is.
Well, you're supposed to ask the questions.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
You don't know where the taxes go, do you?
Here's what I do know.
No.
It's laid out very clearly in the IRP regulations of the commission how the accounting is supposed to be done for demand-side management programs. And I guess it was the commission order of 2010 laid out exactly that you're supposed to calculate, I guess, the 4 tests, and the measures have to pass the total resource cost test. The rate impact measure test is calculated, but it's not a mandatory test. So all of the considerations on the costs and benefits have been specified, and the company has filed those in their plan. So we have reviewed that information, and all of the we've reviewed the calculations for the various tests. We've reviewed the calculations for the additional sum, and everything appears to have been done, from a high level correctly. So how the company collects income taxes on the additional sum doesn't enter into any of this.
True. So it comes out in base rates then. It's got to.
What I'm saying is that for the,
Okay.
I feel like this line of questioning the witnesses have explained the amount of tax experts, they can answer the question as best as they can. I feel like this line of questioning should get asked.
Try again, Mr. Clarkson.
I assume you don't know where the taxes are collected.
I don't know, and it's not relevant.
Okay. The DSM surcharge, after it appears on the customer's bill, there's also going to be a franchise fee collection based on money and sales tax. Would that be true? Is this another impact, revenue impact on the 4-cent adder?
Be careful on this response.
Well, these are more appropriate questions for a rate case. You're asking us questions about how the bill is calculated.
Well, I'm just trying to get the true revenue impact of the DSM surcharges.
Well, I have the tariff here, and I'm sure you can read it as well as I can, how it explains how it's going to be calculated.
Now, it's company's position, is it not, that customers should not be allowed to opt out of the DSM program? That is, don't pay the surcharge and don't get any rebates. Is that true?
It's the company's position and its staff's position.
Yes. Now, you're in favor of the company's program to help low-income families, are you not?
With modifications, yes.
With modifications. Would you consider exempting them from the surcharge so they would have more money to do their own energy efficiency programs without being dependent on PSC and Georgia Power?
No, that's not our recommendation.
I see. Now, Georgia Power proposes some sort of crowdfunding to get additional money
Yes,
for low income.
that's correct.
If someone donates to that fund, can they be exempt from the DSM surcharge?
No.
Would you favor that change? Would the staff favor changing that?
No, that's not part of our testimony, but
I
I'm
see.
assuming if someone donates, they'll have a deduction in that regard.
Well, just a general question, would it be better that people use their own money for things instead of having to depend on grants from Georgia Power?
Are you saying a customer for the crowdfunding?
Anything?
Let me try
Okay.
this one. The real answer to your question is that it's state law that when a utility files a integrated resource plan, it has to include demand-side management programs in its filing. So this is state law. It's a statute, and I'll read it to you. The plan has to identify and take into account any present and projected reductions in the demand for energy which may result from measures to improve energy efficiency in the industrial, commercial, residential, and energy-producing sectors of the state. And then it goes on to say, the plan must adequately demonstrate the economic, environmental, and other benefits to the state and to customers of the utility associated with the following possible measures and sources of supply. And the first one it mentions is improvements in energy efficiency. So it's the state law that this is the way it's to be done. And I would just say that, the basis for the commission's IRP rule is based upon this statute. So I would just say that it's state law and state policy that utilities are supposed to look at energy efficiency as a resource, just like it would look at power purchases or other things that it does.
As you were reading that, you read, and I heard the term industrial use in there, yet the industrials have opted out of paying for the DSM surcharge and getting rebates. Are they breaking the law?
Well, they haven't.
Well, he's the one reading the law, said industrial.
I was just reading it, I wasn't interpreting it.
Well, you told me they couldn't exempt the rest. All right, we're, successful dodge. Let's talk about this opting out. The industrials can opt out. The low incomers cannot. The industrials have lawyers that attend PSC proceedings. The industrials make campaign contributions, but the low incomers don't do that. Does that have anything to do with whether they can opt out or not?
No.
Well, we're not gonna answer
Yeah.
that question, but you're saying opt out. The commission we do not have a program. So, I mean, there is a difference. There's not an industrial program, so they're technically not opting out.
They're exempt from it. Instead of opting out's the wrong word. Is it exempt?
Well,
should
we
be-
currently, the commission, we have not adopted industrial programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Sierra Club? Southern Alliance? I didn't hear.
Good afternoon, panel. Robert Baker for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. And let me circle back to a question I asked the previous panel, and they said y'all were the ones who could provide the answer. I had asked if the staff would be receptive to considering an all-source procurement process. Is that something that fits in with your testimony about considering all generation options in the future?
Yes, it is. It's consistent with our testimony.
Okay, thank you. And at page 11, you recommend that for the amount of utility scale renewable energy above 950 megawatts approved in this proceeding, the procurement should include wind, solar, hydro, biomass. Is that correct?
Yes, whatever is above the 950.
Okay. And do you also recommend for the additional utility scale renewable energy above 950 megawatts should serve customers outside of the customer renewable supply program? Is that correct?
We feel that's appropriate.
Okay. And didn't the READY program that is currently being implemented serve all customers?
Yes, just the ready utility scale, it does.
Thank you. If the commission were to increase the amount of renewable energy above 950 megawatts, would it be appropriate to be allocated to, say, a READY 2 program that could serve all customers? Is that an option that could be considered?
Well, that's our recommendation. Are you
Okay.
saying anything above 950?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that was our recommendation.
Okay. Could you utilize the existing READY program format for implementation of that additional development?
Can you, I guess, elaborate on that question? Use the two differences we had was that Georgia Power had stated for the CRISP program that the customers generally prefer wind or solar. Our recommendation was for anything over 950 that all renewable resources, biomass, everything be allowed to bid in, as well as it would go to all customers, not just C&I customers. So we had two recommendations. So I'm not really sure what you meant by the READY format.
Well, I mean, if we have this new program, the CRISP program, but then if you have an additional amount of solar development, could hypothetically a similar READY type program format be utilized for the development of this additional renewable generation if it is approved?
Yes, that's what we're recommending.
Okay, thank you. In the 2016 IRP, do you recall that the company studied developing up to 8,000 megawatts of solar generation?
Yes, that was in their
Okay.
analysis.
Was that study repeated in this IRP?
It was not.
Is staff aware of any technical or operational limitations that would deter Georgia Power from getting authorization that would result in a total of 8,000 megawatts of solar and other renewables, including existing and authorized solar from being developed.
Just logistically, that seems like a lot.
Logistics?
I mean, yes, we've only installed, less than 3,000
Oh, okay.
megawatts.
I thought you said logistics. Okay. What, and, okay. Was it a matter of economics and timing to be able to develop an additional amount of up to 8,000 based on the 3,200 that is in the works, that has been developed and is being developed?
So are you asking us what would be some of the factors not to do up to 8,000 now?
No, I guess what would be some of the general factors that would impact a decision to develop more solar or renewable power in the future with those
Economics,
and timing?
economics, timing, interconnections. There's a lot of things that would affect it.
Especially the split between DG and utility scale. Where half of it would be DG, that would be a lot of projects. And that would take much more time.
And would interconnection be an issue based on location of the development?
Yes, I'm sure it would be. And also evaluation of the transmission impacts. I mean, there's a lot of things, there's a long time that goes into the evaluation.
Okay. So potentially, there's a possibility Georgia Power could develop up to 4,800 megawatts of additional renewables without hitting technical or operational limits theoretically?
Well, we've never, I'm not sure that number is still a good number, 8,000. So, I mean, I'm not sure.
I understand, but that's what we had that was a study that was done back in 2016, and Mr. Kaduk has indicated that there hasn't been a new study done, so I'm just working with what I have.
Right.
Could the 8,000 megawatt total be achieved by, hypothetically be achieved by soliciting, say, 1,500 megawatts through the CRISP program, 1,500 megawatts through a Ready 2 type program, and then verify that any additional solar megawatts are cost effective by using an all-source procurement to validate that the additional megawatts are indeed part of a least cost plan, hypothetically?
Hypothetically, but we're not suggesting that.
At page 10 of your testimony, you recommend that staff and the company should work together to develop program guidelines for the CRISP program. Has staff reviewed SACE witness Teresa Perry's testimony, perchance?
We have.
You have. Would staff consider the recommendations offered by Ms. Perry to make the CRISP program more customer inclusive?
Can you remind us her testimony?
Of her testimony?
What was her recommendation?
Her recommendations, I don't have them right in front of me right now, but essentially it's to allow customers to develop more, up to 100% of their existing load if they need it to. Well, let me just refer you to her recommendation. I don't want to
Okay.
try to remember when I don't have them in front of me, but I mean, she lays out some concerns based on her experience.
I think without copies provided as witnesses, they're not going to be able to reference this.
All right, I'll try to
Post a
rephrase.
question. Post a question.
The question, so you've reviewed Ms. Perry's testimony?
Yes.
Okay. And did any of did the recommendations that she put forward, that you remember, did they seem reasonable and perhaps helpful in order to make the program more customer inclusive?
They seem reasonable, but I did see I disagree with some of it too.
All
at
right,
the same time.
okay. That's fair. As part of developing the CRISP guidelines, should there be an outreach effort to learn what prospective customers need from the program?
Sure, yeah. Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
definitely, one of the things I heard from the last Rady CNI program was just giving more notice. I heard customers say they didn't really know, it happened the 2 or 3 weeks they were given. So I know definitely more notice to show that they're interested in participation.
Okay, thank you. At page 74, I'd like to ask you a few questions about support capacity. Did you review the testimony of Mr. Brendan Kirby with SACE by any chance? Did anybody on the panel take a look at Mr. Kirby's testimony? Just, were you familiar with it?
Yes, I have.
Okay, thank you. And what about the Georgia Large Scale Solar Association witness, Mr. Arnie Olson? Has the panel looked at that testimony?
Limited by my retention, I read all the intervener testimony.
Oh, you did? All right. All right. So then you've also looked at Mr. Cox and Mr. Bago's and Mr. Goggin and Mr. Rhodes' testimony.
He said all.
All right.
He said he reviewed all.
Yeah, okay, I'm moving. In Mr. Olson's testimony, and this is at, I don't know if you want to go to page 35, but subject to check at Mr. Olson's testimony, page 35, and Mr. Kirby's testimony at page 25, they both explain that if Georgia Power is directly adding volatility of load to the volatility of solar, it will lead to a significant overestimate of incremental regulating reserves. Do you agree with this assessment?
No,
Okay. Why don't you agree?
because it's a conclusion without analysis. I believe that part of our recommendation was for the on the support for the company to use some real data it has from its own operations of the now having a substantial amount of solar, a measurable amount of solar on the system, to see what kind of regulation and other kinds of support capacity changes they've had to put into their operations. And that's analyzing that information is probably the best way to find out whether that statement is true, close to being true, or inaccurate.
So is it your recommendation that the company provide that information so that Mr. Olson and Mr. Kirby can do a thorough analysis?
My recommendation was that the company do that analysis for review.
Okay. And then could that analysis then be utilized by other interveners and other parties to do an evaluation?
Yeah, sure. I'm not gonna. I don't know necessarily the process that would and the timing, but obviously, if it's filed, then there's intervention.
Okay, thank you. Do you agree with the assessment of Mr. Olson at page 36 of his testimony that the size of the forecast error is not relevant to support capacity, that this is relevant to unit commitment, not capacity procurement? Would you like me to repeat that again?
I don't agree.
Okay. Could you tell me why you don't agree?
The amount of capacity that's needed by any system is a function of how much it needs for the reserves based on what influences reserve. Install capacity could be based on longer-term planning issues and the like. It could also be based on operational constraints like the kinds of regulation or ramping or other things. So it could be both commitment and the amount of install capacity. Again, this is something that probably can come out of some analysis by the company.
Anybody else have any? All right, thank you. Do you also agree with the assessments of Mr. Goggins at page 22 and the Cox-Rabago testimony at page 39 that the impact of variability and uncertainty on capacity value is accounted for in both capacity value and support capacity, which is double counting?
I think you need to give me that question again.
Okay, I'll do that. Let me just say, do you agree with the assessments that the impact of variability and uncertainty on capacity value is accounted for in both capacity value and support capacity, which is double counting?
I disagree.
All right. Could you explain why you disagree?
They're attempting to get two different pieces of the puzzle. One is installed capacity required for minimum reserves for reliability as like the reliability study and the reserve margin study. The other one is has to do with some operational conditions, and so together they would make up. together. They could be additive, or they could, or not. That to be, but I don't necessarily agree that I know right now that they're double accounting.
All right, thank you. At page 57, line 16, you testified that you don't have any concerns with the reduced distribution energy losses component of the RCB framework. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And reduced distribution line losses are a benefit that is considered only for solar systems interconnected at the distribution level. Is that also correct?
That's correct.
Are reduction in line losses based on the average line loss across all distribution systems? Would you like me to repeat that
I'd
again?
have to check. I have to check because it wasn't changed since the 2016 methodology, as it says in my testimony. So I'd have to look up the in the RCB framework if you want me to look for that now.
No, could I make that a hearing request and just move on?
So.
Thank you, Mr. Athos, appreciate it. Athos. In the case of a farm that might be irrigating or processing its products during a time of high solar output, would you agree that an average agricultural facility will be towards the outer edges of a distribution system rather than near a substation?
I couldn't answer that.
Okay. And is it true that during peak periods, aren't marginal line losses also greater than the average line losses?
That tends to be the case. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So when the RCB framework assumes that avoided line losses for solar projects on distribution systems are estimated at the average line loss rate, that could significantly underestimate those line losses for many solar projects at agricultural facilities. Is that correct?
There's a couple of premises in there, so that I can't. I just mentioned earlier that I have to check about the average line losses, so that I really can't answer that question until I have looked at that.
All right.
And I also said I don't know whether the agricultural facilities are at the end of the distribution line.
Well, normally would a farm, have a substation located in the middle of the farm, or is it normally generally towards the end of a distribution line from a substation?
I would imagine that it's a little bit that there tends to be longer lines from substations to some parts of the farm. Where the load of the farm is that you're talking about is a question, not necessarily where the whole farm is. And so, it depends, and it could be a yes, but it also could be no.
It's a general question. All right, let's turn to a few questions about additional sum. Are you familiar with SACE's witnesses, John Wilson and Brian Jacobs' testimony regarding the additional sum issue?
We're generally familiar.
All right. They observed that a 4-cent per kilowatt hour additional sum paid on a first-year savings basis would pay the same for short impact behavioral programs as well as long impact home or business retrofits. Is that, do you have a recollection of that statement by them?
Can you repeat that?
Okay. They observed that a 4-cent per kilowatt hour additional sum paid on a first year savings basis would pay the same for short impact behavioral programs as well as long impact home or business retrofits.
Yes, we
Right.
agree.
Do you think their concerns are valid?
Yeah, there also are concerns as well.
Okay. Should the same additional sum be paid for the program that has a short impact compared to a program that has a long-term impact?
Well, we have some concerns about their proposal as well as Georgia Power's, is that it's not based on net savings or net benefits.
All right. But taking that into account, should the same additional sum amount, in your opinion, be paid for a program that has a short impact compared to a program that has a long-term impact?
No.
Yeah, let me add, let me chime in. So there's a couple of things. I think in general, having a higher incentive for measures with longer lives is a good thing, because the savings are there, they last longer, especially for measures that have a life of 10 to 20 years. So from a policy point of view, that makes a lot of sense. I think the advantage of the additional sum approach for energy efficiency, that of the mechanism that's in place now and has been used for several years, is that it's based upon the calculation of the net present value savings over the life of the measures. And it shares those savings, that dollar amount, between customers and the utility. And the problem with the company's proposal and the SACE proposal is it doesn't do that. And let me explain why. Under the company's proposal, if you have an energy efficiency portfolio, and let's say it saves a million kilowatt hours, and you were going to pay somebody 4 cents, then you'd multiply the 4 cents times the 1 million, and if the programs are cost effective, and let's say had a net present value savings of, I don't know, let's say $1 million, the $1 million would go to the company. The worst case scenario is that if you still have a portfolio with 1 million kilowatt hours a year of savings in a year, and it has a benefit cost ratio of 1 to 1. And so there are no savings. The utility would still get, 1 million kilowatt hours times 4 cents, and the customers would get nothing. So the problem with the incentive mechanisms that are based on a cents per kilowatt hour times the kilowatt hour savings is they don't meet the criteria for the additional sum. And I'm trying to remember which document that's in, but it's in the statute. That's right, I've got it right here. I just had it open, but the statute says that there has to be a sharing of the benefits between the utility and customers. I could read you the language, but basically the current mechanism does that, and it does it well. And we've been doing it for several years, and I think it's, in general, at a high level, it's 8.5% of the net present value savings go to the company, and the remainder goes to ratepayers. But under these alternative proposals, if the savings are small or non-existent, the company would still get the same additional sum. So there's not an equitable sharing of the benefits. I mean, the ratepayers don't get anything out of it. So for that reason, the staff isn't in favor of either proposals, either the one by the company or the one by SACE.
All right. Thank you for that explanation. But in general, in big picture policy terms, is it beneficial to provide an incentive for a program that has a short-term gain or a program that provides a long-term gain? What is better as far as?
The answer would be, if we had to choose between two, if we only could choose between the company's proposal and SACE, in this hypothetical, we would choose the SACE proposal, because we like the concept of a larger incentive, emphasizing, trying to avoid the situation where a company is incented only to do short-term measures. So the SACE proposal does a good job of addressing that particular issue, if I only had to choose between those two. But we don't. We have other options to choose from, including the current mechanism, which is far better than either of those.
No, thank you very much for that explanation. Turning to demand-side management, what is the staff's opinion regarding the company's base case?
What now, the proposed case?
Yes, their proposed case.
Well, we're recommending approval with modifications.
Okay. And is it fair to say that the company's base case is not the optimal program that you would like to see because you're offering recommendations?
Well, from a savings number, we're not recommending changes there. It's just really administration of some of the programs.
And the budgets.
And the
Correct.
budgets,
And the
yeah.
budget.
Yeah.
From a cost effectiveness perspective, does the advocacy case or the company's base case produce the greatest benefits from both a total resources cost test perspective and a utility cost test perspective?
Well, the short answer is that the advocacy case and the aggressive case have higher net present value savings than the company's proposed case,
All right.
without getting into all the numbers.
Got it. Well, what case should be selected if the commission wants to reduce total system cost? If that's the objective of the commission, which case should they select?
Well, if you mean total resource costs, we can answer that question, I guess. So give me a second to
All
look
right.
it up.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's in Technical Appendix 2, the DSM program documentation. I don't have them all summarized in front of me. DSM. Okay, the proposed case, let's see if I can find that number. Oh, the total net present value savings is, let's see if I can find this, under the TRC is about $1 billion. Under the aggressive case, oh, don't look at that one. Oh, advocacy, okay. It's, well, let's see, a lot of spreadsheets here. It looks like it's 2.6 billion. So if that were the sole criteria, the net present value savings based on the TRC test, you would pick the advocacy case.
All right, thank you. Isn't it true that more than half of the total proposed base case budget is planned for non-incentive costs?
I believe that's correct. I checked it, and I think the incentives were about 43% overall in 2020, 21, and 22. So, let's see. The non-incentives would be, what, 57%? All right, yeah.
Yeah.
And does the advocacy case have the same high level of non-incentive cost?
I have not checked that. I mean,
Yeah, we did, that's not our recommendation, so we
If you don't know, you don't know.
don't know.
Okay. And were the program cost assumptions for the advocacy case developed by Georgia Power Company?
What now?
Were the program cost assumptions for the advocacy case developed by Georgia Power?
I think the advocates sent certain information. I know they couldn't send budgets and savings numbers, and then the rest was developed by Georgia Power. So they only could do one.
They did one, and I think
No,
it
they-
was.
Yeah, they could only do one.
And what I remember from reading was that the advocates provided the savings, and the company came up with the budgets. I believe that's subject to check.
Okay, thank you. And if the advocacy case were adopted by the commission, would the staff also recommend adjustments to the program cost assumptions put forward by the company?
Can you repeat that?
If the advocacy case were adopted by the commission, would the staff also recommend adjustments to the program cost assumptions put forward by the company?
Yes, staff would probably have changes to the company or the proposed case by the advocates, yes.
And if they accepted your recommendations, that could make the advocacy case even more cost-effective?
Yeah, that's correct. When we made adjustments to the proposed case, it improved the cost effectiveness of the proposed case. So if we use the same methodology, it would improve the cost effectiveness of the advocacy case.
Okay, one final question. This is, I think, a prior question from another panel that they referred it to you. And does the staff agree with the exclusion of renewable resources that do not include storage from participating in the capacity RFPs?
Does what now? Repeat that.
Okay. Does the staff agree with the exclusion of renewable resources that do not include storage from participating in the capacity RFP?
No, we don't.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Commissioners.
One second, please.
I could
Mr.
give
Athens.
you the answer to that question. I
All
made
right.
myself productive while
I don't want to cut you off. If
No,
you,
no, it's on, the reason why it escaped me on the calculation, and perhaps you saw a sample or illustrative number that was based on average. In the framework that was filed by the company on pages 18 and 19, they describe the distribution losses, and they talk about it as a project-specific number because of the variability of the kinds of things you were raising. So it's a project-specific number and not an average number that's applied.
all right. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Southern Renewable Energy. South Face.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, seems like I'm always approaching the podium at about 10 till 5. Distinguished panel, my name is Steve O'Day. I represent South Face and Vote Solar, and I have a few questions for you on their behalf. I want to go back to some questions Mr. Eversbach asked you. This has to do with DSM, and it had to do with the methodology and the assessment of long-term rate impacts for the certified DSM program. Did you also evaluate the long-term rate impacts of the proposed advocates case?
You might give us just a second.
Sure.
It's in the company's filing.
Okay.
In Technical Appendix 2 under the DSM program appendix.
I believe the actual numbers and the actual results were trade secret values, so I'm going to ask my questions by avoiding those actual numbers. Mr. Eberzog also asked you about the estimate of the rate impact for Vogel and asked you whether or not about 4.5% of the impact was already in the rate case. I believe you said you didn't know, right? Was already in the rates, in the customer rates.
Yeah, right. I think we said we didn't know. We weren't familiar one way or the other.
Okay. I was just kind of bringing you back to that. If you would accept, subject to check, that the number is about 4.5% that is already in the customer rates, would it be true that the proposed long-term rate impact of the advocates DSM case would be less than that number?
Well, we can check. Give us a second. Subject to check, we'll accept that.
Okay, thank you.
But wait a minute, the question was it less? So I guess I can't answer the question because I can't seem to find that. Oh.
Yes, subject to check.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just
I found it. No, I found it. It was buried at the very last page of my book here. Okay. And this is for the advocacy case?
Correct.
Oh, boy. It's less and more, depending on the year you pick.
Okay, thank you. Referring to page 20 of your testimony, you're talking about an allowable increase in a program's non-incentive cost per the first year KWH saved for the proposed 2020 program budgets as compared to the 2017 and 2018 budget levels, and you indicate that they should be capped at no more than a 50% increase. Is that right?
Correct.
On the prior page, you state that one would expect that the overall program non-incentive costs per the first year kilowatt hour saved would decrease as the program ramps up over time and achieves economies of scale. Is that right?
Well, can you, which page and which line?
Okay, that was on page 19, lines 18 through 21.
Mr. O'Day, you know that he has sworn that these statements in his testimony are correct.
Yes, John.
Yes, we agree with that.
Then we agree with it.
It's in our testimony.
So what I wanted to ask is, how did you arrive at your recommendation of allowing a 50% increase in non-incentive costs per first year kilowatt hour saved?
Here's what I recall. I looked at I have backup spreadsheets where I have all the data on the company's non-incentive costs and kilowatt hour savings for each program. And what I had noticed was that some of the percentage increases, I think for 3 of the programs, were very high. And going from memory, one of them was like 75% increase. This would be for looking at the period 20 through 22 compared to 2017 and 2018. The percentage increase between those time periods, one of them was 123%, I think. One was 75%, and another one was well above 50%. And I was struck that just seemed like those seemed like very large increases to me. You know, in the last couple of years, inflation maybe has been 2 to 3%. The forecast going forward is 2 to 3%. And I was thinking, okay, if you go from 2018 to 2020, it's 2 years. So I was thinking, okay, you know, you would expect with normal inflation that the cost might be 6 to 10% higher, not 120%. And we also had information from the company on what they were projecting for staffing. We had information on the company where we had asked, you know, for justification for some of the increases in those budgets. And the company's response typically was that, you know, it was based upon their judgment, based upon program experience in 2016, 17, and 18. And I think what I finally decided was that, well, you know, when a budget is submitted, it should be reviewed and analyzed. And I looked at those all the increases that were high. I said, really, those ought to be capped. You know, I didn't see any reason in the information that had been provided by the company and their data responses that would justify an increase of 75% or 123%. So I said, okay, I can understand why you might have to have some increase based upon your experience. Like if you ran the programs in 2016, 17, and 18, and you were understaffed, you didn't have enough manpower, you might have to add a person. And some of these programs, you know, we're talking about, overall they have about 100 people, FTEs. So they may have to add a few people. But I also said to myself, well, the savings aren't going up. In fact, the savings are less than what they had in 2018. And I just arbitrarily drew a line at 50%. And I said, you know, somebody has to come in here and say, no, you can't have that much. You know, you haven't provided the justification for it, and there needs to be some line that's drawn in the sand. And rather than pick out specific things, you know, we felt that should be cut, like an FTE here or an extra contractor here. You know, we said we'll set a budget cap on the non-incentive costs and let the company decide how to do it. So anyway, that's how I got there.
Well, you illustrated my point. The 50% number also seems a bit high, given the rate of inflation and the other factors that you talked about. Would it be reasonable to set the cap at 25%?
I don't think so, and let me explain why. Because I also had done that study of all the utilities in the United States on what their non-incentive costs were, and my feeling was that overall, the company was right on the median, okay? So I didn't think it called for a draconian cuts to what they're doing. I mean, overall, they're right in the middle of the pack of like out of 500 utilities. But I felt there needed to be some guidance given to the company that, for 3 out of these, whatever, 10 or 12 programs, there needed to be some oversight and feedback provided. And again, we're not micromanaging. We're saying, okay, for these 3 programs, you need to keep the budgets lower, and because we just don't see the justification for a 123% increase in a non-incentive budget.
Okay. I want to ask you some questions that derive from the testimony on page 22 regarding additional DSM programs. And I think you mentioned, again, I believe it was Mr. Eversbach who asked you these questions about the energy efficiency potential studies that have been done by the company.
Yes, he did bring that up.
Okay. And are you aware of the amount of energy efficiency potential that has been determined for industrial end uses?
I don't know the specific numbers, but I have the report with me. We need to look at it.
Subject to check.
But I mean, subject to check. I'm generally aware of the findings of the potential study.
Would you accept that the 2018 study set it at 34%, subject to check?
Sure.
Okay. And are you also aware, subject to check, that it has increased with each one of the studies, the efficiency potential studies that have been done?
Well, let me just go back to that other question. The 34%, is that technical, economic, or achievable potential? Because there are a lot of...
Cost-effective, achievable
Okay,
energy
okay.
efficiency savings.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Given the significance of the scale of the industrial energy efficiency identified in these studies, why is the staff not recommending an industrial energy efficiency program?
I mean, it's not part of our recommendation. In the past, the commission has not, the policy has not supported an industrial program. And so we recommended going forward with residential and commercial.
And if sorry, I don't need to ask you more questions. I have a few questions on solar, and this has to do with behind-the-meter solar. On page 93 of your testimony, you talk about the need for continuation of the company's DG solar program. And you note that customers wanting to install solar at or near their property would likely be unable to participate in an RFP and therefore would not have opportunity to receive long-term pricing, which is needed to finance a solar facility. Why is long-term pricing important?
Well, for financing reasons, you need to show, typically how I've understood it, you need to show your financiers that there's a guaranteed energy output.
Payment stream.
Do customers on the R&R tariff receive long-term pricing?
They do not.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. O'Day. Georgia Powell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Panel, Steve Hewitson on behalf of Georgia Power. How are you this afternoon?
Good.
All right. In your testimony, you reference Section 532 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, right?
Correct.
Okay. This is a section of ISA. Can I pronounce it ISA? You recognize where I am at?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it ISA? ISA?
ISA.
Thank you. This section of ISA amends the PURPA, Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. In a regulated market, PURPA governs the utility commissions that oversee regulated utilities, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay. So ISA does not directly govern regulated utilities, does it?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but this act, Section D says electric utilities, says Section 111D of the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act of 1978 is amended by adding at the end, each electric utility shall integrate energy efficiency resources into utility, state, and regional plans and adopt policies establishing cost-effective energy efficiency as a priority resource. And so my understanding is that the commission adopted that as part of its policies.
The commission did, but ISA doesn't in particular itself govern public utilities, right?
I think you've answered the question as much as you can. I believe that he's asking for a conclusion that can't be offered.
You have anything to add to the question?
No, I don't.
Sustained?
Okay, so just to make sure I understand staff's position, this panel cannot give a legal interpretation of a statute. Is that the position?
He's read from the statute, given what an understanding, but he can't go over.
Okay. Thank you. Then, Mr. Chairman, I move to strike this panel's testimony beginning on page 13 at line 12, where this panel provides a legal conclusion that Georgia Power has not complied with ISA Standard 16. That testimony is on page 13, starting at line 12 through page 14, line 4.
You want to strike that information?
Question is, has Georgia Power complied with ISA Standard 16? And this panel goes into great detail about it. The attorney for staff has just told me they can't provide a legal conclusion about a statute. That's exactly what that question does, and I move to strike it.
Mr. Thomas?
Can you point to the legal conclusion? I think the staff.
Has Georgia Power complied with ISA Standard 16?
Again, I believe this is a high-level answer to the question that comes from just reading the statute. I don't believe this is a legal conclusion.
And interpreting a federal statute. That's exactly what the question asks them to do. That's exactly what the answer does. It is a legal conclusion, just like the legal conclusion I just asked this panel.
It simply states a quote from
A statute.
Is it a legal conclusion, Mr. Thomas?
I wouldn't say it's a legal conclusion. I would say it's a high-level overview that staff is taking into account in the testimony. I wouldn't say that it's a legal conclusion.
It's a high-level legal conclusion.
I understand your request, and I'm going to hold a decision on that for further interpretation.
May I add
I will let you know that.
one thing?
Yes, sir.
The commission adopted that standard, and it's discussed at length in the 2010, the commission's IRP order. And so I would, ask you to take note of that this is in the commission's order that it has adopted this standard.
It doesn't change the fact that this panel is trying to make a legal conclusion. Let me ask this question, and then maybe we can move on. Would you agree that it's the commission's decision, the commission's determination, and the commission's obligation to decide whether Georgia Power has complied with its policies, procedures, rules, and any federal statute that's in play, not this panel's?
Do I agree with that statement?
Do you agree with that statement?
That it's this commission's decision?
Correct.
Well, I mean, staff generally makes recommendations to the commission.
But that's not the question, Ms. Barber.
So, yes, the commission makes those determinations.
Okay. One of your recommendations is that DSM be recognized as a high-priority resource in future IRPs, right?
Yes.
The term high priority doesn't appear in ISA, does it?
That's correct.
Okay. That's your request that this commission elevate DSM to a higher priority than it already does, right?
Correct.
You testified in response to some of Mr. Ebersbach's questions that energy efficiency in DSM is less expensive than supply-side resources. Do you recall that?
Yes, based upon the company's own numbers.
Okay, but there's no evidence in your testimony to support that, right?
The, I have to look at my exhibits. We don't believe so.
Okay. Mr. Escherbach also asked about stakeholders having input in Georgia Power's DSM planning. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Stakeholders can certainly participate in the IRP process and present evidence for consideration by this commission, right?
They can participate, yes, that's correct.
And they can present evidence before this commission just like they're doing in this IRP proceeding, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to ask you a few questions about the additional sum, if I can.
Okay.
Do you agree that providing for an additional sum for energy efficiency and DSM programs is an essential component to the regulatory framework?
Yes.
Would you also agree that the additional sum should be greater than zero to provide incentive to the company to implement DSM programs?
Should be greater than zero. Yes, that's correct.
If the additional sum was zero, the company is not being encouraged to participate in those programs, right?
If that's the motivating factor, that would be correct.
Okay, and you would expect that if this commission viewed DSM as a priority resource, you would expect it to incentivize the company to pursue viable DSM programs through an additional sum, right?
Correct, and we currently have an additional sum that does that.
On a program level, if the additional sum is zero or negative based on the net benefits analysis for a DSM program, would you agree that the company should not continue the program?
No, I would not agree with that.
So how would the company be incentivized to continue the program if the net benefits was zero? Or if the additional sum would be zero?
So, well, we haven't had that situation. There have been net benefits from our programs.
Okay, but that wasn't the question. The question was, if on a program level the additional sum was zero, should the company discontinue the program?
Okay. So your question was if the net benefits were zero?
Yeah.
I can give you an example.
You can give me all the examples you want after you answer the question.
So I'm gonna answer.
If it's zero, go ahead and
If
answer.
you said it was for a specific program.
Sure.
Okay. So if the net benefits were zero, for example, for a low-income program, the commission may decide that it would still run the program because you're serving customers who can't afford the product. These are people who have a high energy burden, as has been talked about in these hearings. So it may very well be that the commission may decide as a public policy that the program should continue even if it doesn't have positive net present value.
Okay, and even if it's providing no additional sum to the company?
That's a policy decision for the company.
Okay,
I
but
mean,
if
for the commission.
Is
Slip
it
of the tongue.
this panel's recommendation that if a program has zero additional sum that it would provide to the company, that the commission should have the company continue the program?
Well, under the current mechanism, I'm trying to remember, under the current mechanism, the additional sum is calculated, I guess, for every program, and then it's added up. So let's say you had an additional sum of 15 million and one of the programs had zero. I guess, the company would still get a significant additional sum.
But not on that program. And I'm asking on a
I
program level.
agree, but
Yeah.
that may be the commission, that's a policy decision for the commission,
So back to the question.
as it has been for the last several years.
Yeah, and I understand that, but would it be this panel's recommendation that the company should continue that program?
I mean,
kind
we
of a
have
yes or
not
no.
had that situation before, and it's clear in our testimony that we support the company getting an additional sum. We just don't support what you're proposing.
Okay, I'll move on. On page 26 of your testimony, you list several principles for DSM incentive mechanism, right? Page 26, lines 16 through 19.
Yes.
Okay, would it be accurate to characterize these principles as saying the additional sum should be simple to calculate, predictable for customers and the utility, and incentivize the utility to maintain DSM programs while still providing benefits to customers?
No, because you forgot the number one, which is strike an appropriate balance of risk and rewards between utilities and customers.
Okay, I thought I got that at the end while providing
I didn't hear
benefits
it,
to the
but
companies.
okay.
Okay. Well, with that addition, would that be a good summary?
my testimony is pretty clear as it's written.
Okay. Whether the additional sum is sufficient to meet these criteria is a policy decision by the commission, right?
That's correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. As you testified earlier, an appropriate additional sum is an essential component to the regulatory framework, right?
Yes.
And it's important to incentivize the company to pursue viable DSM programs, right?
Correct.
Turning to page 31 of your testimony, you critique the company's proposed additional sum because if avoided costs decreased by 25%, the company's additional sum amount would remain the same, right?
Correct.
Wouldn't it also be true under the company's proposal that if avoided costs were to increase by 25%, the company's additional sum amount would also remain the same?
Correct. I think the issue is that if the net present value benefits went to zero, the company would still, under the company's proposal, get the same additional sum as if the benefit cost ratio were 2 to 1. And I think it's a serious major flaw in the company's proposal. It doesn't do what the statute requires, which is a sharing of benefits equitably between the company and its customers.
One of your recommendations is that the company should recover a de minimis additional sum on any projects where the company affiliates are selected as winners in the CRISP RFP. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You understand that the company's bid evaluation process includes the additional sum for evaluation purposes, right?
Wait, now, repeat that.
You understand that the company's bid evaluation process includes additional sum for evaluation purposes, right?
Yes.
So your proposal would actually give affiliates like Southern Power an advantage in the RFP process because they would have to cover less cost with the bid.
Yeah. Go back. Can you repeat that question? Because where does it show that? Because no, we're not aware that the additional sum is built into the evaluation process.
You're not aware of that?
No.
Okay. Isn't that exactly what commission staff argued in the McIntosh PPA proceeding in 2002? That if Georgia Power was denied an additional sum when they contract with Southern Power would have a built-in competitive advantage over other independent producers?
Not aware of that, but I just know currently it's not built into it.
You don't believe it's built into it?
Into the evaluation?
Correct.
Like short list, we are not aware of it being built in.
Okay. Has the commission considered a proposal for reducing the additional sum on projects when the company affiliates are involved before?
It was in our testimony last year.
Okay.
Or 3 years ago.
And the commission did not adopt that recommendation at that time,
It
right?
was not part of the stipulation, that's correct.
Okay. On the customer-cited program, one of your recommendations is to continue the customer-cited program, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would it be your recommendation that the price be set at avoided cost again?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree with me that setting price at avoided cost does not bring the same value to all customers as procuring the solar prices at below avoided cost?
Well, we would agree with that. There's also different reasons to do this program other than, I mean, you're not harming customers, but you're providing customers opportunities to build projects on their sites.
Turning to the RCB framework. We currently have an RCB framework approved by the Commission for evaluation purposes, as well as application to behind-the-meter programs, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, we do.
In this IRP, the company is not changing any methodologies to calculate solar avoided cost, but has only suggested changes related to the use of updated data, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So absent a new order by this commission, the orders approving the use of the RCB framework that were issued in December of 2016 and June of 2017 would remain in place, right?
There's inputs and calculations that have changed. Some of them have, as we've had in the testimony, some of them we think are in error. Some of the inputs, some of the changes that we have pointing out are changes that, as they've been implemented, we think are not in the not consistent with the intent of what they're trying, of the calculation that they're trying to make.
And I understand your position on it, but my question was, absent a new order by this commission, the orders governing the use of the RCB framework would remain in place, right? You make several recommendations, as you just said, sir, about the RCB framework components. Is it fair to say that these debates can get pretty technical?
Yes.
Would an appropriate outcome in this proceeding be that the company and the staff be directed to continue collaborating on these issues to resolve the points you raised in your testimony?
We do.
Thank you, panel. That's all I have for you today.
Mr. Thomas, redirect.
Yeah.
Ms. Barber,
Yes.
would you say the staff is confident that all of the DSM portfolio that staff is recommending is beneficial to ratepayers?
The portfolio? Yes, that's correct.
And are there certain policy reasons that low income and industrial customers might be treated differently by this commission?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think there was some confusion over staff's position on the additional sum. Can you summarize for commissioners what staff's position on that is?
Staff's position for the energy efficiency is for it to remain as it currently is. We were asked the question of whether we wanted the company's method or SACE's proposal, and we have similar concerns with both, is that there could be no net benefit and a company would still get an additional sum. And under the company's proposal, they could go to a one-year measure life. There's areas that we're concerned about how they may structure their programs to get a higher additional sum. For the renewables, we recommend keeping 8.5% of net benefits. So we just wanted to make it clear that our position is for it to stay the same.
And is anyone on staff proposing an additional sum of 0?
No.
And is the statute that requires programs for energy efficiency and low income to be taken into account, should that statute be enough to motivate the company to follow through with these programs?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, earlier you read from the statute that said energy efficiency should be taken into account. Is the statute, and anyone on the panel can answer this, is the statute enough to motivate the company?
Yes.
Mr. Hewitson pointed to page 13 of your testimony. Is page 13 of your testimony simply your understanding of the statute without claiming to be an attorney or draw any kind of conclusions?
Sustained.
Thank you.
Have both staff and company witnesses in the past been given the ability to give their understanding of basic principles of statutes without that being considered a legal conclusion?
That wasn't the question objected to, and they objected to my question saying that it was a legal conclusion, that they couldn't give a legal conclusion of the statute. That's why I moved to strike the testimony. It wasn't a general understanding, it's not what's included in their testimony.
That concludes my redirect, but Mr. Chairman, I would like to point to the PSO and pursuant to Section 3G, motion to strike any portion of pre-filed testimony must be filed at least 2 days prior to the hearing. So I'd just like to bring that up without arguing over the merits of the testimony.
Point taken.
And I think that's fine until the witnesses refuse to answer my question, saying they're not lawyers and they can't give me a legal
Point
conclusion.
was taken.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further, but I would request that staff exhibits 16 through 33 be entered into the record.
So recorded.
Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? to this?
Yes, I have just a couple. The customer-sided program that they're wanting to terminate, and we've heard some reasons why, but can you give me again the benefits of keeping this program and maybe an example that you might cite that we had in this last iteration?
Well, I mean, the benefits are, you're paying avoided cost. The customers would have the solar array either at or on adjacent to their property. The big concern with Georgia Power is currently the company doesn't have to own it. It can be a third-party developer own it. But still, the array's at the customer's facility, and no one really knows who owns it but the parties themselves. I just think it provides long-term financing, which is required sometimes for customers. In the past, Georgia Power has wanted, these customers to bid into an RFP, and we would know if that happened, they would probably not win. Because,
Right, so this-
most customers are not sophisticated enough to bid into a RFP.
So the Walmarts, the Targets, the others that want it on their property or next door to their property, they're able to do that without having to go through the whole bidding process on this,
That's
right?
correct. And usually it's a very small, it's 50 megawatts is what we've done in the past, so it's not a huge part. But it was, a third of the DG portion in the last IRP.
So would you have any problem just cutting the program to 25 megawatts? Is there any negative to cutting it to a smaller amount, or do you feel like it needs to stay at the same amount? What do you recommend?
Well, I mean, that would be, of course, a policy. I'm pretty sure it was almost fully subscribed. It may have not been. It was 40-something megawatts is from my memory. So it would be just less customers being able to participate. But that is the only portion of our solar portfolio that's paid, avoided costs, long-term avoided costs.
Yeah,
The
so
rest
ma-
of it is market-based. So
Yeah,
we've moved.
so maybe we just leave it where it's at. Regarding the additional sum and not really growing our DG, not DG program, but our demand side program, if we increase this program and get a little more scale to it, would that resolve some of the issues that they're concerned about? That Georgia Power is concerned about, if we grow the program, because it maybe wouldn't require as much of an additional sum. Right.
It may alleviate it on the commercial side. There are concerns around the residential side because the additional sum is not, avoided costs are dropping, net benefits are dropping. So and then plus two, the company doesn't have the stability of knowing, okay, we're going to get $15 million a year just based on our projected savings. But you're not really following what we feel the statute is. You should have a portion of sharing of savings. So I think it's more on the residential side that they have concerns, and staff does agree that we do want the company to continue these programs, but there are specifics that we want the company to have, for it to be calculated fairly.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to follow up on my colleague's line of questioning on the customer-sided solar, how is paying something at avoided cost a benefit for the customer?
The customer themselves or all customers?
Well,
Well, it's
Commissioner
not-
Eccles had asked what the benefits were, and you said they pay for it.
Well, I mean, as opposed to getting paid, bidding in, it's security, it would be more, but it's not harming other ratepayers because you're only paying avoided costs, you're not paying above it.
Well, I guess I'm not trying to torture you too much,
Yeah.
but I agree it's not a detriment, but just trying to figure out how it's a benefit to be paying something.
To
at
the
avoided-
customer themselves?
Yeah.
Well, it's gonna be more money. They're gonna be paid more
Well,
than if they
okay.
bid it in.
I'm talking about the customer base.
Oh, well, the
not-
customer
yeah.
base, they're not harmed. So
Okay.
there's no benefits, but there's no harm.
Okay.
So-
And then what does have my interest on the customer service, and it's been brought up a couple times in the past, sort of alluded to when Commissioner Eccles made his Walmart and whatnot, is the economic benefits on the customer side. So, I mean, can you walk me through one more time how that would occur, say, industrial or commercial customer wanting to locate to Georgia and renewable energy is important to them, specifically solar?
Right. Now, this is something totally different. This is under the CRIS program.
Okay, never mind then.
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Well, it's Georgia Power's proposal that 450 megawatts would go to attract the customer to locate in Georgia. So we really didn't challenge that. We didn't disagree with the company but they've had more of the discussions with the customers than we have. But we have generally heard that customers want to meet a portion of their load with renewable energy. So Georgia Power would have that 450 megawatts to be able to attract that customer to locate.
So the 50, what we're discussing, it'd be lottery and
Yes,
that type
if there's
of,
more than
okay,
50
okay.
subscribed, correct. Yep,
All
that's
right,
correct.
thank you.
Thank you, panel. You may be excused this time. It's my intentions to seat another panel and get their summary, get them sworn in and get a summary, and then we'll see where we are from there.
So we don't need to move.
Can we have a 5-minute restroom break?
Why?
I thought that might be self-evident, but
You've heard the summary, hadn't you?
I've heard this. All right.
Of course.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the panel of Jamie Barber, Nick Cooper, and Richard Spellman to the stand on behalf of Public Interest Advocacy staff. Ms. Barber, Mr. Spellman, I'd like to remind you both that you are still under oath.
Okay.
Mr. Cooper, would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And Ms. Barber, just again, for the record, can you just please state your name and by who you're employed?
Jamie Barber, Georgia Public Service Commission.
Mr. Spellman, same question.
Richard Spellman, GDS Associates.
Mr. Cooper?
Nick Cooper, Georgia Public Service Commission.
And on April 25th of this year, did you pre-file or cause to be pre-filed 34 pages of testimony in question and answer format?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections that you need to make to your pre-filed direct testimony at this time?
No, we do not.
And if I were to ask you the same questions today here under oath, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask at this time that the panel's testimony be copied into the record as if it was given orally from the stand.
So copy.
Mr. Cooper, do you have a brief summary that you can share with us?
I do. Thank you.
Mr.
Good
Thomas,
afternoon.
while he prepares that summary. Mr. Cooper?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. In our testimony, we addressed the Georgia Power Company's proposed demand-side management plan. In this case, the company is requesting decertification of 2 of its currently certified DSM programs, amendments to the certificates of 3 currently certified DSM programs, and updated program economics for the remaining 6 currently certified DSM programs. In addition, the company is requesting certification for 3 new DSM programs, 2 residential and 1 commercial. Staff recommends budget reductions of non-incentive costs totaling $10.6 million for the 3-year plan. Staff proposed portfolio results in an increased TRC and a nearly identical RIM test, which shows that customers receive more benefits and no increased pressure on rates due to staff's adjustments. Staff recommends approval of the company's request as filed for the following items: decertification of the EarthSense New Home Program and the HVAC Service Program, certification of 3 new programs, 2 residential and 1 commercial, the Income Qualified Crowdfunding Program with staff's proposed modifications, the Thermostat Demand Response Program,
and the commercial behavioral program. Amended certificates to the home energy improvement program, the residential lighting program, and the commercial HVAC products program. Also, the continuation of the power credit program, and last, a 3-year program evaluation cycle. There are several items for which staff recommends modifications to the company's requests. For all programs, staff recommends approval of updated economics to account for several portfolio changes and budgetary adjustments made by staff in its testimony. Staff recommends for the income qualified tariff-based financing pilot that the company work with staff to significantly reduce the administrative cost per household before the pilot proceeds. Staff recommends continuing current spending levels for the Learning Power program and the residential and commercial energy efficiency consumer awareness budgets, as well as keeping the pilot budgets at $2.5 million per year. Staff recommends an increase to the budget for HopeWorks to $400,000 per year. Since the program plans included in the certification filing are not final, staff recommends that once a program implementer is selected and the plans for each program are drafted and completed, that these plans be provided to staff for review and approval prior to implementation of the programs. Staff recommends that the results from the impact evaluation be used in 2022, not in 2023 as recommended by the company. Also, staff recommends applying impact evaluation results that differ significantly from savings estimates used in the company's 2019 program planner worksheets be used in all years in the 2020 to 2022 program cycle. Finally, staff is recommending a modification to the DSM program planning approach that will allow demand-side management resources to be fully integrated into the integrated resource planning process. This concludes our summary.
Okay.
Well said, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Chairman, the panel is available for questions from commissioners and cross-examination.
Thank you very much. We're going to see how far we can go. Commercial group? Concerned ratepayers of Georgia? Emory? Georgia manufacturers? Georgia Distributed Generation Group? Georgia Industrial Group? Georgia Interfaith Power and Light? Georgia Large Scale Solar? Georgia Solar Industries? Georgia Watch?
You commissioners, panel, I have a few questions. Just referring to your testimony, beginning on page 8, lines 7 to 8. Would you agree that you state the company surpassed energy savings goals set in the 2016 IRP in both 2017 and 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you believe the company would be able to cost effectively achieve higher energy savings targets than they propose in this DSM?
Yes.
Still on page 8, just a little bit further down the page, 11 to 17, you testify, your testimony has percentages of savings achieved in commercial programs and in residential programs. Do you see that?
Yes.
And would you agree that what your testimony shows savings from residential programs being about 25%?
Yes.
Does staff have a position on whether savings from residential programs relative to commercial programs could or should increase?
We don't this time. We have in the past, and but we did not make a similar recommendation this time.
And I thought you had in the past, and I'm wondering why you hadn't made that recommendation this time.
Well, part of it too, I mean, we are generally supportive of the company's proposal. Part of it too is that the concerns that the company has with the additional sum is that the residential portion they're not getting as much. And also too with the lighting standards, that was part of it. Some of the potential is going away.
Right. That's right. Under the Energy Independence and Security Act, there are new provisions for lighting that will cause the efficiency of lighting. It's currently still planned to go into effect, but it may not. But at least at the moment, we think it will. And it'll become effective January 1st, 2020. The baseline goes up, so the savings go down. And so a large part of the potential disappears.
Thank you. And then turning to the really bottom of page 10, but really the top of page 11, in your testimony, you're describing the company's proposed income-qualified crowdfunding program. I'll give you a chance to get to that point in your testimony. And ask, as you reference, that members of the community would opt in to access a centralized web portal to learn about opportunities to raise funds for neighbors. So my question is, do you have concerns about the privacy of those neighbors who may need assistance if their information is shared with community members via a centralized web portal?
Well, we do have some concerns. I know I read it in some of the testimony, but I do remember that Georgia Power said that the identity's not going to be given out. I thought,
Subject to
yeah,
checking
that's
the
just-
transcript, might it have been that they didn't know?
or either that, or it hasn't been finalized, but I thought I remember Dr. Smith saying that, but there are, to answer your question, yes, there are concerns that we need to address during the development of this program.
Would staff support a program that did not have ironclad protections for the privacy of any individual whose information might be released on a public portal?
So would we support it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying not to ask this as a double negative, but if, what I've asked and that you've answered is, we don't know
Right.
if the company plans to have these protections in place. Staff would be asked to weigh in on, staff has asked, is that correct, to see, once an implementer is hired, more
Well, once-
details?
yeah,
So
exactly.
my question is, does staff have a position on whether or not it is appropriate for individuals' information to be published on a web portal that might reveal details about their income and their need for assistance? Does staff have concerns about privacy?
Yes, we do have concerns. I mean, that would be something we would have to address in the development of this program.
Could you describe some of the expectations you would have in evaluating concerns about privacy?
I mean,
We would assume that the company would take proper steps to protect the privacy of customers, and unless they indicate to the company that they are okay with their information being shared in order to find funds. If that was part of it, it may not be, but since this program is not fully found an implementer and been fleshed out, that is to be determined.
Let me add to that. One of the things we've done since the company testified is we've reviewed the transcripts from your cross-examination, and from that, I circled about, there were several issues you brought up, and I think the staff, working with its consultant, would, use that as a checklist to make sure that these confidentiality provisions are taken care of and addressed before going ahead with the program. I think you brought up several issues, and I noticed in the transcripts there are many pages of discussion on that issue. So I think that would be a good place to start, to have a checklist of items to where we would do oversight.
yeah, I know you don't want to hear this, but that is something that it hasn't been finalized because we're not really sure yet how the program's going to be developed, but that is something that we would assure that the privacy is anonymously. Because, I've read your testimony or another panelist's testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Spellman, I appreciate that you did refresh yourself on those few pages, and I promise not to have another few pages in the transcripts on this question this time. But one particular point, and I think, Ms. Barber, you used the term opt-in, and that was a particular line of questioning I had for Dr. Smith when the company panel was up, about whether these neighbors in need who might have a crowdfunding among community members, whether they would opt in to having their information shared or opt out. And I believe the witness response was, again, don't know. And I'm just, is staff testimony that you would expect that it would definitely be something that customers would have to say, yes, I agree to have, beneficiaries, Mr. Chairman, I think is how you prefer, that the neighbors in need would have to opt in to having their information shared in some public way?
I mean, you're asking a question that we have not had these conversations with Georgia Power, so we
Okay, that's fair.
still need to develop this, so.
Okay. Well, a lot of unanswered questions, but thank you. And then turning to the bottom of page 11 and the top of page 12, you reference this is regarding your recommendation not to support the company's proposed $2,000 per home spending limit, but to keep it at the current level of $3,750 up to per home as needed. And an issue. Am I correct that one issue you raise is that with that limitation of 2,000 in place, there might be a delay in getting extra funding might be needed to complete a weatherization repair, might make it more difficult. Is that something that could delay the installation of those measures?
Yes, or the funding may not be realized for that extra funding, or whatever's needed.
And you think that that's potentially problematic?
It could be. I went back and looked at the quarterly report. I'm not for sure that the average spend was on that report because I didn't see it, but I know generally Georgia Power has said we're not really sure what their average spend is, whether it's the residential is around 1,800 or it's multifamily. So the answer is yes, it may create that gap to be able to get the additional measures completed.
If the company were to keep a higher limit in place, that wouldn't necessarily mean that every home would get that higher level, correct?
Yes,
That would
that's
just
correct.
provide the flexibility as needed. Would you say that that would make the administration of the program more efficient?
If the cap was 3,750? Yes, I'm assuming.
Well, I don't know if it's more efficient or not, but the current cap is 3,750 and the average is significantly below that. So we would expect probably similar to be the case moving forward. But we didn't want to limit a project just because it went slightly over 2,000 if it was necessary and a viable project for the program.
Okay. Turning to page 14, at is it line 5? Yes, on line 5 in your testimony, is it true that you're recommending the company expand its potential funding sources for this program?
We are, but I'm not really sure where you're at.
I'm on page 14. I think it's line 5
Yeah.
in your testimony.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to ask some questions about that. What might some of those additional funding sources be?
Well, I've just listened to the direct here, and we're not experts in this area. So we would say, we heard you mention corporate sponsors, or I don't know who.
I think Commissioner Eccles might have mentioned corporate sponsors.
So we just
You don't
said
know.
we would work with the company or they need to look at additional funding sources, because it sounds like during the hearing, it's like everyone's going to be competing for funding if they go to nonprofits.
I'm a nonprofit, I can agree with that.
So you're going to be competing against each other for funding, so you're going to look outside of that.
Okay. Would an increase in the incentive budget in the DSM income qualified program be one source of additional funding?
Overall incentive or per home?
An overall increase in the incentive budget. So you're familiar with the company's budget, and elsewhere in your testimony, you make a comparison between the incentive and the non-incentive spending.
And what you're suggesting is that source would be the company.
Well, they would actually be ratepayers, but.
Well, yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is a source, but that is not our recommendation, but it is a source.
Do you agree that in the company's filing, the budget that they have for the program that has the non-incentive and incentive budgets combined is more than the current budget?
Yes.
If the company were to lower the non-incentive and increase the incentive budget, if the program, would you agree that the program would benefit from additional funding? Is that not what your
More
test?
customers could participate in the program if there was more funding for the program, yes.
Yes. So is one way that more funding could come to the program through an increase in the overall incentive budget for the program on an annual basis?
Yes, that's one way.
And do you agree that the company is proposing a step increase, I think in the first year, of $600,000 to the incentive budget?
Overall budget, yes. I think that's
To the
about
incentive?
correct.
Thank you. I think, yeah. And would that additional funding were to be available, would that make that would eliminate the need to wait for additional funds to come through crowdfunding in order to implement more measures in more homes?
I don't know if we have a good answer to that.
Okay.
I think the additional funding would go above and beyond what the standard set of measures that the company would look to implement. So they may not, that may or may not be allow projects to move forward faster or slower. If it'll that extra funding will do things that the Georgia Power funding would never be able to accomplish. It may not be related.
Now, on to another subject. If you look at the bottom of page 18 and really the top of page 19, you're talking about the company's pilot programs. Is that correct? You see where you're talking about the company's proposed pilots?
Yes.
Are pilots intended to determine whether, and your testimony talks about this cost effectiveness for full scale, is that correct? So are pilots intended to determine whether programs are cost effective and therefore could be scaled to serve more customers as part of the company's DSM portfolio? Is that your understanding of the intention of pilots?
Yes.
Does spending $6 million on a pilot that is designed to almost certainly not be cost effective potentially waste $6 million? And again, I'm referring now to the income qualified tariff based pilot, where you've raised in your testimony. Is it true that you've raised concerns about the admin spending and that could lead to the program not being determined to be cost effective?
Yes.
And so
If it was
would
ever-
spending $6 million on a pilot with the current design, you would say is almost certainly not cost effective and would therefore lead to a conclusion not to scale it?
I mean, it could.
It could?
Yeah. I mean, if the company decided to come and get a full-scale program, it potentially could.
But the way the current program, the way it's currently designed and the company's submittal, is staff concerned that it would have a result that says it is uneconomic?
Yes, and we have that in our testimony.
And would that lead to a conclusion that spending that $6 million with the current design, when your testimony suggests that it's uneconomic, would that potentially be a waste of $6 million?
Well, I mean, our recommendation is for the company to look at ways to reduce the admin costs. So we support the pilot, but we want the company to work to get the admin costs reduced.
Let me ask you on that pilot program. I have a keen interest in this. Obviously, this was my idea, on this particular program, and I certainly don't want to torpedo this program with having the design ineffective and unscalable. So what would you need to raise the number to in terms of participants in order to make the program, kind of flip it where the admin cost wasn't out of control?
We haven't done that break-even analysis, but we could. I think it would take a lot. So
a lot, like maybe going from 200 to 600 or 200 to 700, 800. What are you talking about?
I'd have to run the numbers.
I'd be interested.
I'm afraid it'd be a lot higher than that.
I'd like to see the numbers if you all could do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then, still on page 19, lines 11 through 15. In that section, you testify about concerns about the timing of companies requesting uncollectible debt to be recovered through the DSM tariff. Do you see that there?
Yes, I see it.
So, does the company recover uncollectibles from other customers in any other scenario?
Yes.
Could you describe those scenarios?
Well, bad debt expense, is that what you're saying?
Do they recover that from other, does the company recover bad debt from ratepayers who do not have bad debt?
From our general customers, yes.
Ratepayers, underwrite, it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's an expense, so yes, there is a bad debt expense that would go to all customers to pay that.
And
as part
how,
of the rate.
and the issue you're raising here in terms of the timing of that recovery?
Yeah, it's kind of-
is that inconsistent with the company's practices?
Well, my concern here is basically we don't have the tariffs, so that's something that we're going to be working on the rate case, but it's just basically, if I don't pay a bill 1 month, is the company going to request it how soon after? Because the customer could come back on and pay it, so I don't want double recovery. It's really more of a timing issue. How long are you going to get the customer that they're not going to come back on or not pay this before you go and get it recovered through the tariff? So it's more of a timing issue.
And
We're not
why would
challenging-
that timing not be the same as it is for the company's recovery of other unrecoverable
Well,
debt?
see that, I mean, I'm not, it's been several years since we've been in a rate case, so I don't know that right offhand, so.
And then finally, on page 22, in your testimony, lines 4, wrong page, hold on, let me get to the right page. Page 22, lines 4 to 7, give you a second to see your testimony there. Has the company provided any justification for reduced savings targets in this DSM, but higher non-incentive costs?
No, I mean, we heard Dr. Smith say new programs are generally higher, higher admin costs, but no, there's really no justification for, the company kept the savings flat and, had asked, we have looked, generally, they're increasing their FTEs. Nick, do you know?
Oh, that's specific, but several. Some of it's just the program mix, and we refer to the ISO standards taking away some of the lower hanging fruit on the residential side for the lighting. So they'll have to have a higher, there may be harder to get to the savings, so the admin costs might go up. Our concern, I think, mostly the biggest program we recommended a decrease on is the commercial side, in the prescriptive program, which tends to, is a mature program. But some of the other ones.
You're talking about a decrease on budgets, right?
Yes.
Decrease on budgets.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
That was your
that's
question.
what she's asking. Yeah, incentive costs.
Well, a decrease on savings and an increase in non-incentive costs.
to be
is what
clear,
I'm talking
yeah,
about. A decrease in savings, but an increase in non-incentive costs. So the company is going to, am I correct that that's saying the company is going to spend more and achieve the same or less savings?
As proposed.
Yes.
Yes, the program mix will change, so it's not 100% comparable since some of the programs are going away because of factors that we've discussed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clarkston? Oh, I was going to tell you that Sierra Club? Southern Alliance, Mr. Baker? Southern Renewable? South Base? In the morning, 9 o'clock. We stand in recess.